Hey, thanks for coming. I wanted to talk on this video about what it is that makes coaching, in my mind, not only one of the most enjoyable professions in the world, but one of the most worthwhile. And it's that we have the opportunity to impact the world by impacting the people who are impacting the world. And for me, to be able to be a part of the evolution of the planet, to be able to be a part of helping bring out the best in the people who are going to impact the world the most, it takes coaching to a whole other level. And that's what I want to talk to you about in this series. I'm going to be talking about impacting leaders. And a leader is a very broad-based term, because on the one hand, there are people who are leaders by profession. They're CEOs, they own companies, they run countries, they lead organizations. And that's a kind of a leader. But as well as the people who are leaders by job description, there's another kind of a leader. And I think Steve Jobs did an amazing job of speaking to this second kind of a leader. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And very often, the leaders you coach may not think of themselves as leaders. They may think of themselves as misfits. They may think of themselves as the crazy ones. They may think of themselves as the ones who it's never going to work out for because they don't think like everybody else, they don't fit in. Well, one of the things about not fitting in is that's part of what makes somebody a leader. And your ability to help somebody see that in themselves is a huge part of their journey to being one of those people who change the world. Hi, I'm Neill, and I've been coaching and impacting leaders since 1990. And there's a lot of things I've learned over that time, but that journey really has been as much an inner journey as an outer one. And what I've come to see is that there are certain things about human beings that are just true, and they're true no matter what your status in life. They're true no matter if you're trying to lead a family, lead a company, or lead a country. And that aspect of leadership, the science of impacting leaders, is what I want to share with you in this video. Now, there's also an art to doing this work. And I'll kind of point to the art. And over 30 years, I've developed my artistry, but the science, the fundamental principles behind how the mind works and how human beings work has never changed. And there really are only three simple things you need to know in order to be able to coach and make a difference with anybody. And the first is that at core, there is a life force inside people that wants to express. It manifests as a twinkle in the eye, as a sense of irrepressible joy and aliveness. It sometimes manifests as confidence, it sometimes manifests as ego, but it always manifests with an underlying intelligence, an intelligence before the intellect, an intuitive sense of how to get from A to B, of how to bring something into the world that does not yet exist. That's actually built into everybody. I call it in my work the principle of mind, as in the larger mind, the universal mind, the impersonal mind. And helping people wake up to that in themselves, see how it is already guiding them, and learning to live from it and tap into it more and more is a huge part of the benefit people will get from working with you. Now, there's a second principle, a second thing that is true of all of us, and that is that to a certain extent, to a greater or lesser extent, we are awake. We are awake to our own experience. We are awake to the experience of others. We are awake to the possibility that comes through us and the possibility and opportunity that we can see in the world around us. Now, I talk about that as the principle of consciousness. And if you think of consciousness like a glass elevator, raising consciousness is simply a practical thing. The higher you go up in the glass elevator, the more perspective you have on everything. The more perspective you have on everything, the more you're able to understand the unfolding. And the more deeply you understand what's really happening, the more easily you can impact it. And then the third thing that's true about all human beings, no matter what they do, is they think. We are thinking creatures. In fact, one of the ways that they measure whether or not you're alive is brain activity. So your heart can stop and you're still going. But if your brain stops, you're done. And that principle of thought, the fact that thought is always taking form inside people, it's creating heaven and hell moment by moment. We're living inside a virtual reality made of thought, but we think we're all living in the same world. When somebody starts to wake up to how thought works, wake up to the thought-created nature of their experience, it liberates them because they realize that things aren't necessarily the way you think they are. And because thought is fluid, because thoughts change, because thought is like water that occasionally freezes and looks like an iceberg, but really is still made of water, anything becomes possible. Nothing is off the table. There are no givens. There are no done deals. And when somebody can step into a world of fluidity, of freedom of thought, not thought control, but absolute fluidity and flexibility and freedom of thought, the world becomes a much larger, a much friendlier, and a much more creative place. That may sound, or it may not sound, a bit esoteric. So let me ground it in a story of a CEO I worked with just in the last month. So he came out because he'd been very successful a number of times working for other companies, helping them grow and helping them be sold. And he sort of made his way company to company, country to country, helping companies grow and making his money off the sale of the company in the end. But he had tried a couple of times in the past to start his own company, and they'd always failed. And he had another idea for his own company, and he was really excited about it. But his wife was not on board, and he was still involved with a company that hasn't been sold yet. And he came to me for sort of just help in navigating that situation. Now, I would say we spent 70% of our time talking business. And what I mean by that was just, I would ask him questions about his plans for the business and how he was going about things. And if something he said didn't make sense to me, I would ask him about it. And he was able to clarify through that part of our conversation over a few days exactly what he was up to, what he needed to do, what was next, short-term, medium-term, long-term. But throughout that, we would also talk about these fundamental principles, about where his experience was coming from, about what he had inside him that came out so freely when he was working for someone else, but somehow seemed to disappear when he was working for himself. And in the end, at the end of our time together, I kind of asked him to sum up what had made the biggest difference. And he said, you know, all that business stuff was really helpful. He said, but the thing that I think is going to change my life was when I saw that I'm conditional about the goodwill that I show people. That actually, in my mind, people have to earn goodwill. And he said, when we were talking about thought, I just saw, well, that's not true. I've made that up, and that gets in the way. He said, because when I'm at a job, I love everybody. I'm just, you know, I really enjoy being with them. I'm really spontaneous, I'm really present. But when it's my thing, I start getting into, well, you know, do you deserve my goodwill? You know, shall I be this kind of person here? And he just got lost in his psychology. And waking up to the fact of thought made that obvious to him. Now, postscript. Yesterday, so literally the day before I'm filming this, I got an email from him. I hadn't heard from him since we'd done our work together. And he thanked me again for changing his life. He told me that his wife was 100% on board with his new company, and he's incredibly excited about moving forward. That's the payoff of understanding the science. However you get there, whatever artistry you develop over your career, you can always go back to those same three simple things. What we have going for us, this incredible creative potential, and what we're up against, our own psychology, our own thought-created reality that doesn't look like it's made of thought. It looks like it's real. And when you can start to see through that, you start to move beyond your psychology and spend more and more time in the flow of this creative, responsive, in-the-moment life force intelligence. Now, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I have a lot of great stories of people I've impacted, and there's a downside to sharing them, which is that if you're relatively new to this, or you don't have a lot of success stories of your own, you might hear my story and go, oh, well, maybe one day, but I'm not there yet. But the thing is, this is an evolving process. You cannot develop your art until you start painting. You cannot become a great coach until you start coaching. And the sooner you learn the principles, the science behind how human beings work, the more that art will develop on a solid foundation, that while the way you coach will change over time and who you coach will change over time, you've got a place to stand that you can rely on, that's unchanging, that won't be different for the leader of a country than the leader of a company, than the leader of a movement, than a solopreneur just trying to make their way in the world. And so what I'll often say to coaches who go, well, you know, I'm not successful enough yet, but maybe when I'm successful, then I'll go approach leaders. Well, it doesn't work that way. There's an old Earl Nightingale quote, which is, you can't go to a fireplace and say, hey, you give me fire and I'll give you wood. We only get better at things one way. We do the work, we learn what there is to learn, and then it comes back to us. We get better. We start making new distinctions. We surprise ourselves because we're not reliant on our own knowledge. We start to become reliant on this intelligence inside us that seems to know things that we don't know, that somehow asks a question that just popped up in the moment, and the client's entire life changes, and we're like, where did that come from? Well, it came from the blue. You know the phrase, out of the blue. It came from this responsive intelligence inside us. And that's why one of the things that I'll always say to new coaches or coaches who are trying to expand their practice is, what you've got going for you is that it's not about you. It's not about what you've done. It's not about how cool your life is. It's about what you can help your clients see. And a very simple metaphor for this, right? I don't know about you, but let me make a wild guess and say you like chocolate. It doesn't matter if you don't, but let's say you like chocolate. And you know that if other people would taste chocolate, they would love it. Well, you don't have to be the world's leading expert on chocolate. You don't have to know anything about how chocolate is produced. You don't have to have 100 stories about how other people have eaten chocolate with you and really liked it. All you've got to do is get the person in front of you to taste chocolate, and the chocolate will take care of the rest. Well, it's the same with this kind of coaching. When you have tasted for yourself the impact of understanding mind, consciousness, and thought, of understanding the science behind what makes us tick as human beings, all you've got to do is get good at helping people see it for themselves. In a way, that's your expertise, not in their field or in any field, but in the understanding of how we already work and how to point that out to people. And anyone can develop a mastery at that over time. One of my favorite stories that to me speaks to the kind of insecurity, and that's all it is, by the way, right? We all have our insecurities. We all have the thoughts in our head about why not us and why we're no good and why nobody would ever hire us. And it's just, I actually ask my clients at the beginning of sessions, and if I'm working with somebody over time at the beginning of our time together, one of the questions I'll pretty consistently ask is, while we're working together, how will your insecurity manifest itself? And it's funny to me that in 20 plus years of asking that question, I can't think of anyone who didn't already know the answer, right? So as you're watching this video, how will your insecurity manifest itself? Well, my experience tells me it'll probably manifest at least once as, well, this sounds great for other people, but not for me. So there's a very simple story I like to tell about that. And it's a friend of mine who got into coaching and was a brilliant coach, but had never worked with high-level executives. Worked with people in companies, but never the people. And so this company called him in because they'd heard about work he'd done with somebody else, and he got very nervous, but then he got past it, and he went in and he made a presentation to the board of this company, and he said, it was amazing. I have no idea where the words came from. Well, we know where they came from. They came from that real-time, in-the-moment responsive intelligence of life. But he just was like, wow, I was on fire. And he was kind of feeling quite good about how the whole thing went until he sat down with the board afterwards. And one of them said, and what have you done? What's your resume? What's your CV, your curriculum vitae? And his heart fell. But what occurred to him in the moment was just to be honest. And he said, well, I'm divorced. My wife is actually nuts. She's actually locked up. None of my kids are drug addicts yet, but I am an alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in 30 years, but I am an alcoholic. He said, my last business went bankrupt. And I don't remember all the details, but like that was it. He did the litany. And they all kind of stared at him, kind of like, and then one of the executives said, can you help us? And he said, absolutely. And they hired him. And that was his first leadership gig, and he's been doing this work for the last 20 years. It doesn't matter what you've done. It matters whether or not you can help. Now, while on the one hand, your impact as a coach isn't about you, on the other hand, part of the impact of coaching is what it does for you. And in our next video together, I'm going to share with you some of the ways that you can be positively impacted as you learn more about what impacts leaders. So you probably know there's a comment section, and there's 3 questions I'd like you to answer in the comment section. And the first is the one that I mentioned earlier in this video. How will your insecurity manifest itself on your journey to being a coach who impacts leaders? How are you going to get in your own way? How is your thinking going to kind of take over your head and make it look like this isn't for you? The second question is, what would it be like if you had the absolute confidence that you could walk into any scenario, any situation with any person and just tell them the truth and not have to big yourself up or dumb yourself down, but just be really straight about who you are and be really straight about the impact that you know you can have with them, that you know how you can help them? And third, what would it do for you if you woke up to this more in yourself, if you in a way became the first leader that you impact? How would it be for you if you were more awake, more alive to this creative potential? If you could see through your own thinking more easily and not get so caught up in it? And if you could go up and up and up the glass elevator so that it became more and more obvious to you exactly what's needed and when?